Alright, so today we're talking about Indiana Jones and the Great Circle. I'm a pretty big Indy fan. It may be my second favorite movie series. I'm not quite sure you don't think about your second favorite movie series as much. First is Star Wars. They can't make enough bad movies to outweigh how good the good movies are in the series, because they're that good. Anyway, Star Wars and Indiana Jones were my childhood. It's been a good while since we got an Indy game. I remember really liking Infernal Machine and Emperor's Tomb pretty well. And even though it was a bit janky, I also really liked Staff of Kings as well. I was really hoping, despite reasonable doubt, that this would be good, especially considering Microsoft and Bethesda's recent track record as publishers. And against all odds, they pulled it off, for the most part. This game is as good as you can make a game without it being great. It really could have used a lot of refinement in gameplay and story. It is really fun though, but before we talk about this indie game, let's talk about another indie game demo. The demo for What Happens at Midnight, my action survival horror FPS, is available for free right now on Steam. You're sent to investigate the town at nightfall and quickly find out interdimensional forces are invading our world. Hop between worlds, meet strange characters, and survive cosmic horrors once you find out what happens after midnight. Let's start with the gameplay. It's pretty fun. The immersive sim/stealth action gameplay is a surprisingly good fit for indie. Fist fighting is good, the punching, the parrying, the blocking, and all feel good with good feedback. The dodging isn't great, it's really short range and a bit finicky on whether or not when you actually press the button, you'll actually dodge. Finicky things are going to be a big problem with this game. Grappling and pushing enemies is fun, and this game needs to give you more chances to push enemies off cliffs. The whip is fairly good for both combat and traversal, but again, it's finicky. Sometimes the whip cracks don't hit the enemies or scare off animals when they're supposed to. For some reason, it's usually better when you use the pull move, which is good. And traversal, if you jump before you do a whip swing, which kind of feels kind of natural to do, you'll probably not hit the swing point. The traversal aspect kind of annoyed me the most. You don't need to have like triple whip swings like in Emperor's Tomb, but it would be nice to have some fluidity with the whip and traversal. Melee weapons are pretty good in combat and for throwing. There's a wide variety of them lying around. Pretty much anything can be used as a weapon. Gunplay is fairly good, but the hit stun from bullets is pretty extreme. I get they don't want you to go in guns blazing, but this is a pretty bad way to reinforce it. You usually use picked up weapons, can only hold one at a time. It would be nice if you can holster at least one weapon that isn't the revolver. And that's the only thing special about the revolver, is that you can holster it, which I really would have liked if they did something more with it, like how in RoboCop's gun is the one you can upgrade. None of the guns have bullet penetration. It would have been a pretty obvious move to give the revolver bullet penetration, or in general, give it more damage or something. It's also annoying that reloading it is again finicky. There's fairly decent enemy variety, and they're good to fight, although it's annoying that the heavy enemies don't have hit stun. It doesn't matter how big you are. If you get shot in the head or are smacked with a sledgehammer, you're going to stop for at least a second. Platforming is mostly pretty simple. What's there is good, but it would have been nice to see it expanded upon. Puzzles are fairly good. They're harder than the usual types of puzzles you find in non-puzzle games, but easier than puzzle game puzzles. Occasionally I couldn't find the puzzle pieces or what to interact with, and that was annoying. But most of the time it wasn't a problem. Cinematic set piece gameplay moments were good, but few and far between. It's clear they're not trying to be Uncharted, but an Indiana Jones game needs set pieces. It's part of the franchise. Also, this game will tease you with trains, but there is not a train section. Level design is fairly good. There are 3 main small open worlds with a lot to explore. I personally think they get better as the game goes on, but most people tend to like the Vatican the most. I didn't like the narrow pathways being the start of an adventure game. It does have the best side quests though, probably. Overall, the moment-to-moment level design is also fairly good, with a good amount of options at any moment. The side quests are a mixed bag. There's the collectibles side quests, which are what they are, but when it comes to story side quests, the amount of content can vary wildly. Sometimes it's just go out and find a dead body. Sometimes it's an entire tomb to explore. Giza has the worst side quest, while the Vatican and Sukhothai were much better. It would be nice if the quests were better sorted. Speaking of which, the UI and similar user experience things in the game are pretty bad. A couple things were like navigating your inventory is once again very finicky. There was also one part where I died a bunch because I couldn't see a button prompt. Whenever you go to pick up weapons, it can be finicky. There's the side quest where you have to get radio frequencies, and when you're done it says to give them to Gina, but you don't interact with her. You interact with a table with a radio on it to finish the side quest, which it should say put the frequencies next to the radio. A lot of that little annoying sort of thing. Overall, despite all these issues, the gameplay is pretty good, with a lot of emergent gameplay that leads to moments that feel right out of the indie movies. It just needs some refinement. Similar to the gameplay, the story is good in the overview, but has some issues up close. First, as a positive, Troy Baker is a great Indiana Jones. If you listen real hard, you can hear some imperfections, but you can tell how immersed he is in the character, and he brings him to life very well, despite the writing for Indy not being 100%. They do try to make Indy a deeper character in this by bringing some of the subtextual things like Indy's troubled relationship with his dad and avoidance of connection more to the forefront, which isn't bad, but to me, it just kind of feels like we know all this, and they're just sort of retreading old ground in a different way. Gina is a decent indie girl, but I think early on, a lot of her attitude that was supposed to come off as spunky sort of came off as childish to me, but I think she got better toward the end. I found Voss to be a mediocre villain and pretty similar to other indie villains. The developers kind of hyped up his psychological tactics in early presentations, but I don't really think that got that much play. Tony Todd was pretty good in this, as a sort of Jaws from Bond type of character in terms of him being this imposing figure that's a real challenge for the hero. It's a real shame Tony Todd didn't do much more voice acting before he died, because he's known for that great voice. The side characters are fairly good. I think the best one was Antonio. Overall, I think the dialogue can be a bit weak sometimes. There were a few instances of where I felt Indy might make the point he's trying to make, but he wouldn't say it in that way, and other things like that. I think the humor has issues. It's not like MCU style dialogue or something like that. It's just not very funny to me a lot of times. The snake jokes, which are a bit too many of, are a good example. Where yeah, Indy's scared of snakes, but he usually doesn't act goofy about it. He willingly entered a room filled with snakes and raiders. He could get a grip if someone asked him to feed a snake. This isn't absolute though. There are some good dialogue and good humor moments, and other people don't seem to be as nitpicky as me. There's a fair bit of non-English dialogue in this game, which makes sense. It's not like everyone's gonna conveniently speak English, but it would have been nice to hear from Indy's ears, who speaks every language but Avito's, because a lot of the times I would miss dialogue, forgetting to look at the subtitles for a second. They do some good fan service in this game, like the opening of Raiders, recreation, which is nice to see. When it comes to the aesthetics, in reviewing games, I found it kind of strange that when you see aesthetics for an established property, you usually don't think, wow, this looks great. You just think, this looks the way it's supposed to look. And this game really captures the movies. Indy didn't go to Giza in the movies, but if he did, this is what it would look like. So it's very well done and faithful to the source material. There's also fairly good fidelity and realism. There's only one technical issue, but it's fairly bad. It's that the AI is fairly stupid, but I think a lot of people will be willing to look the other way on that for everything else the game does right. Overall, this is a good game that's pretty rough around the edges, but it's definitely worth checking out if you're an indie fan or have Game Pass, and it's probably still worth checking out otherwise. This is about as good as you can get without being great, so I'm giving it an 8.99 repeating. Thank you to anyone who likes, comments, or subscribes. That's it.